who am I? Why am I giving this talk? I'm a senior security advisor. My title change used to be senior security consultant. What the difference is, I don't know. At Leviathan, a small information security shop that does really cool work in Seattle. I am in Philadelphia, and I'm not leaving because I don't think Seattle wants me. In their risk advisory practice. So yes, we've got pen testers, we've got technical testers, we've got people who do the incident response. And my go bag has a lot of cash and a pistol, and not a lot of gear in it. So you generally, if you call me after 3 in the morning, I fix a bunch of different problems. But what we do for the risk advisory service is we help people determine their governance. What is the appropriate amount of spending? What controls should you have in place? Sort of that strategy stuff. And the question I get commonly is, are we spending enough? Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? So that's what spawned this talk. I'm also a licensed attorney, which makes me really, really slow at installing software because I have to actually read the contract. But it also makes me think about how what we do fits into bigger and bigger and uglier frameworks. I'm trying, and I'm a watcher of regulatory trends. I watch what happens in legislatures and regulatory agencies and what insurance companies are doing and what other companies are doing about your security. And these are all trends that I think I've got a handle on. And I'm trying to look like half a step in the future to see what the future looks like. There are no flying cars, sorry. So here's an open question. Why do we pay for information security?
It's cheaper than the lawsuits.
Cheaper than the lawsuits, right? So it brings nothing to the bottom line. We buy information security. It's not free. It's not free as in money. It's not free as in effort. It's not profitable. In fact, I will argue that in most times, information security is net negative, right? Because we get in the way of things. Hey, we'd like to do this thing. You know, like my favorite is, we've got this great marketing idea. Because I talk to startups because it's fun. Talk to people who think they've got the new idea. It's like, we're going to put SAP in the cloud. It's like, really? You're going to put it? No. That's you could do that right. Operative word being could. Because cloud is awesome. ERP is awesome. And that's something I would never want to see. But no, we get in the way. We're the ones who say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. No, making a rocket out of hairspray and a lighter is not an appropriate thing to do in a 2-bedroom apartment. Right? We are the ones that bring the no fun. At best, we're a cost center. Sometimes we get in the way of things, right? We have to approve things. We have to get in the way of that new great software rollout where it's like, I've got some serious problems with confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that system once it's rolled. So we're spending money so we don't spend more money to prevent lawsuits, right? So the idea is this. You spend $1 to save more than $1. If you spend $1 to save 80 cents, you're losing. If you spend $1 to save $1.20, you're winning. We're talking about risk, right? Because it's not that clear. By spending $1, I save $1.20. I buy the firewall. Say I install a firewall that's $10,000. How much did that save us?
I don't know.
Well, no. You don't know. Because did you absolutely remove that risk?
I don't know.
No, we set it up wrong.
No? You transferred it? Right, because think of it this way. You buy the thing, you do the thing, you do the activity, and anything from the most granular control. We changed a firewall rule all the way up to we revamped our entire information security program. Small effort, giant effort. What we're bad at is equating that to dollar risk. And it's not that we're lazy about it, because the idea is this: we want marginal benefit to equal marginal cost. The idea is that you keep spending money until it no longer makes economic value. And we've all seen that graph, right? As you spend $1 for security, you hope you're getting more than $1's worth of benefit, until eventually you start spending more money and you get less benefit. You spend $1 and you get 80 cents worth of benefit. And that's, every beginning management textbook has a supply and demand graph, or has a marginal cost and marginal return graph in it. The problem is that it's really hard to figure out what's the marginal benefit of that new control, of that new policy. We've all seen this one, right? Probability times impact equals risk. And I will quote Wendy Nather when she says, yes, peanut butter times jet engine equals shiny. Because if you don't know what you're measuring, you don't know the probabilities, the output is meaningless. It is a meaningless metric. Anyone ever see a meaningless metric? Anyone ever collect a bunch of meaningless metrics? Put it in a PowerPoint? Send it up to management? Like you know what the hell it means? Like you expect them to go, huh? Even ones that seem meaningful, right? Who here has done a vulnerability assessment of their institution in the last year? Of an institution? Of somebody? Okay. How many highs?
There has to be at least one.
It has to be at least one. But how many? Pick a number. I'm not going to hold you to it.
Say there was 50 findings. Out of that, usually 10 of them are high.
10 of them are highs. So you fix 8 of them. How many do you have left?
2. Well, you may have introduced some new ones.
Right! You fixed 8, now you're up 12. Right? So you're generating metrics, right? And the problem is this is one, it's an emperor has no clothes problem. Because I generate these metrics and look at my pretty graphs and koalas belched out voluminous output about how good we're doing, or what our threat posture looks like, or what our vulnerability surface. We're going to make up a bunch of words like they have meaning, and we're going to condense it down into a PowerPoint that's going to say, we found this many vulns, we fixed this many vulns, how many vulns do we have now? How many new ones have we added because the patch created new O-days that we won't learn about for another 18 months? We're running this hamster wheel, and we're generating metrics like, look, the metrics show activity, right? I have closed this many vulnerabilities. I have fixed this many systems. I ran this fast and this far on the hamster wheel. We don't know what we're measuring, right? We can't calculate probability, right? Because say, for example, you started with those 10 vulns, you fixed 8. Are you now, what percentage are you more secure now?
You don't know.
You don't know, even though you've got numbers, right? You could take a very naive approach and say, we are now 20% as vulnerable as we were when we started. Because each vulnerability maps exactly to a chance of getting owned. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say we generated activity. Yeah.
Can you theoretically get some sort of idea? I mean, it's not going to be an exact probability, but you can conjecture based upon the software, the developers, that particular team, how often they introduce bad patches, right?
I imagine you could build a model. My problem, though, is we run back to this one, the peanut butter jet engine shiny, is that we're going to make so many assumptions that might sound right but aren't borne by a bigger chunk of data. What I think the problem we run into is we don't have a lot of instances. Because I'm going to compare this to insurance. you're shopping for 2 different cars, and you talk to your insurance company, and they give you 2 different quotes, because they have big chunks of data to know. They know your driving record, your age, your sex, marital status, and a few other attributes of you that they've been able to grind back into risk and figure out the chance of having to pay off for you taking that car and damaging or running to someone else varies based on the car you drive and the cost and the cost of the parts and all that. They've got enough stuff they can spit back out, and a very, very good risk. Their model is much better than ours. Because, say, we're going to consider a Cisco versus a Palo Alto firewall. And everyone knows, like, well, Palo Alto's better. How much better? Better. It's further on the Gartner Magic Quadrant thing than Cisco is. But can you quantify it back to how much risk does it remove? And eventually you have to be honest and say, no, but it feels safer. It feels better. More solid. Like when you're buying cars, you go, it feels solid. It's made of steel, of course it's solid. At 65 miles an hour, is it solid? We don't know. The metrics we generate are difficult to put into context that is valuable. But we're going to all say, like, oh yeah, look, we've closed all these phones, we've done stuff. And this is kind of a rant to set up for our next part, which is, we're trying to avoid stuff, right? Reputational and headline risk. And I want to create a new term, because think of it this way. When we're talking about reputational and headline risk, we're the fear of, oh my God, we've been found out that we have really bad security. Or we have embarrassingly bad security. How many of those have actually shut down a company that you can think of? I can't either. But I want to consider a new kind of reputational headline risk, which is not so much that open secret, your security is weak, but that your business model was a fraud, like the Ashley Madison thing. But you also have contract risk. I have a contractual requirement to have these controls do this thing the right way in such a way that I agreed to other people. I'm a vendor to a healthcare provider. I've got some contract rules about what controls I have. I have tort risk. I don't have a contract with you. I'm sorry, I lost all your data. Or as I like to sometimes joke, we moved all your data to the cloud. The problem is we moved it to Pastebin through a third party, an uncontracted third party. So, tort risk. We screwed up, we were negligent, data goes bye-bye. We're trying to avoid that. Regulatory risk. If you are one of those regulated entities, you're a healthcare provider, you're a bank, and you leak, your regulators are calling. Or actually, if you're smart, you've called them and alerted them to the breach. Because you don't want Twitter to tell them. That is the opposite of regulatory goodwill. These are the things we're trying to avoid with our information security expenditures. Here's the problem. Quantifying those risks, like actually figuring out what's it cost. How do you put a dollar value on the actual reputational damage? Say Target, right? How many people said they were not shopping at Target ever again after the breach? Really? Everyone still did. It's like, I'm not going to Walmart, right? Oh no, Walmart, yeah. But contract risk, figuring out that maybe there's a liquidated damages claim. Tort risk, I couldn't predict what a cost of a breach now would work out to be. Maybe a regulatory risk, I could probably map back fines to an equivalent, but even then, I can't put a good dollar on it. So we're not good at assess the benefit of an individual control or program is. And I can't assess what the damages are, which is entirely unlike other kinds of risk. I can price out the value of a car accident to within 10% pretty easily because they're so common. So we don't know what we're measuring. We can't really measure it well. We don't have good models for measuring probability. We don't even know what the impact is. So thought of this a couple days ago. In a room filled with smoke, the floor is a really good guide, right? Because you're trying to go and say, I want to spend more money on information security, and if a smart manager says, how much does that get us? You can either say, well, it's going to make us safer. I think it's a good idea. How much safer? I don't know. Somewhat. That many. I wish to buy 2 securities, please. I have 4 money. So, what's the minimum? Because oftentimes, this is a conversation you have with senior management, like, what's the least I can get away with? And before we usually view that with contempt, but you know what? That at least sets, if you've got to draw a box, setting up what, being able to know where one of those lines is, kind of puts everything else into perspective. So, I don't know where I'm supposed to be, but at least if I'm here, I know where I am. So, what's the minimum you got to do? So, you can generate metrics, but we don't know what they mean at any level. So you don't know what the optimal is. What's the optimal spend? But you know the bottom. So figure out what are your clearest costs. What are the easiest ones to determine? So contract, liquidated damages clauses. You are a contractor to a healthcare provider, and you have a $100 per record rule in the contract. Every record you leak, we're going to decide right now that the damage is $100 because a breach notification letter costs like, and 3 years of credit monitoring might cost $80. Done. That way, we've allocated the risk, figured out what it costs there. I no longer have to work in the smoke-filled room. I have an idea of what it's going to cost me. Well-settled torts. When I talk about car accidents, I know the rough value of running a car into a wall is going to be. Value of the car, likely medical expenses, plus some wiggle room. I don't know what a breach costs. Fines and penalties. Those are generally public, they're fair, they're common enough, and those are, if you have management or customers saying, what's this going to save me? You can point to those and say, HIPAA breach cost this. Or HIPAA fines cost this after a breach. So you've got close numbers, so you get an idea of like, this is what I'm hoping to avoid, and then it's several layers of abstraction away from that. That's why I want to buy $100,000 worth of gear and services from a consulting firm. So, let's talk contract. You've got contracts that are association. You want to handle payment cards? You have a contract essentially with PCI. That means that everyone signed to these agreements before you can handle it. Requiring some kind of certification that I fit these rules. Either self-certification or external certification that says, I do this thing. I meet these standards. And then we have individual, which is contract to con. Individual. Essentially, going back to, I wish to provide services. Healthcare providers do this a lot. Banks will do this. I wish to process data for a bank. And process data, anything from, I'm going to handle some outsourced service, I'm going to do marketing for you, I'm going to handle your stuff that lets me touch your data, that's important. I have a contract with you that says I have to meet your standards. So security requirements and vendor sometimes may require indemnification, where you essentially are taking on their risk. Some kind of audit and disclosure rights that say, I'm not just trusting you, I get to go and look at your stuff. Anything from the 1 or 2 day assessment where I go over your policies, ask you hard questions, and then try to figure out if you're lying to me and come up with a grade between 1 and 10 about how much you scare me, and then go on to the next one. Or it can be a full-on, nope. You're hiring these people, we're doing a one-off pen test to find out if you're actually that bad. Insurance contracts is another example of some kind of agreement between the two, between you and someone else that says you have this level of security. Premiums may depend on controls or policy. I've been asking to get copies of the riders, generally they're fairly simple. They're, give me a list of all the controls you have. And the advantage of this is, it allows me later, if I'm the insurer, to not give a payout because you didn't meet all those requirements, right? You said you did this, turns out you didn't. Well, I'm not paying you for the claim, I'm going to back out of the contract retroactively, it's called a rescission, which is, I'm just going to leave it like we never signed that contract because you didn't do this, what you were going to do, so I'm not going to do what I said I was going to do, which is pay out. So, now, regulatory stuff. Anyone here work in banking? Used to? Healthcare? Okay. Give you a couple examples. Directly regulated. Financial services. Legislation that allows this is Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which creates essentially all the regulatory agencies, Fed, OCC, FDIC, NCUA, SEC, most of those got together and created the FFIEC handbook, which is the guide by which you are judged by auditors. And this is directly regulated, as in regulators show up and say, we're here to look at all your stuff. We are auditing you. No breaches occurred, just, hey, it's your time of the year, and it's going to be rough. Or not. So promulgated standards, regular reviews, and in many cases, you are, as a regulated entity, also in some way responsible for your vendors and business associates. You have to have some kind of appropriate vendor management program, onboarding, offboarding, and maintenance, that says that while you're not necessarily on the hook, if you pick a bad vendor and they breach your stuff, you can't say the dog ate my homework. You have to show some kind of work product that says, yes, they breached, but we did appropriate levels of vetting. So you're now responsible for everything else in your ecosystem. Regulators have some sticks. They can close you. They can say, you are ceasing operations, all of your assets are being held by this holding company, which we will sell off to someone who actually can do the job. Don't go far, but you're fired. Reserve ratios, and this is kind of the intermediary stick, where they can say, you have to hold more money in reserve that you can't lend out or speculate against. You just have to hold that for future risk. And then actual fines for poor practice. Then we have healthcare. HIPAA and high tech essentially create, it's not as intrusive and not as activist as the financial services, because you don't have like the FFIEC handbook. You have reasonable controls and some measure of risk management requirement. And those of you who are doing information security consulting will sometimes create things, we call this salesmanship, where you will say things like, well, I'm here to do a HIPAA pen test. And while a pen test may be an actual appropriate control, it's not actually required by HIPAA. Merely that you do risk assessments and you have done risk assessments to determine whether or not a control is necessary or are reasonable, and you go from there. So internal risk assessment, responsible for your vendors and business associates as well, and significant fines and contagion after the breach. And contagion because these two industries are essentially, they're not monolithic, they're ecosystems. For some of the work I was doing for Blue Cross Blue Shield, I realized they had somewhere between 500 and 1,000 vendors that touched healthcare data. That could be a hospital, medical practice, a print shop, marketing agencies, other Blue Cross Blue Shields. Your data goes in a lot of places, right? Like the Anthem breach probably breached as many non-Anthem people that didn't have Anthem Anthem insurance as it did people that did have Anthem insurance, because somehow Anthem got a bid from another Blue Cross Blue Shield to handle something. The amount of people who have hands on your data is astonishing. ecosystem. So the contagion, you have suffered a breach means that everyone else who might contract with you knows that you have a social disease, right? You can't hold your data. I have to now consider that when I'm coming up to say, maybe I should find an alternative because you were shown to be wanting. So it's essentially it's a relational kind of regulation. Health and Human Services doesn't have to continue beating up the breaching partner. Everyone else does. Or as an old coworker of mine used to say, mob justice is a form of justice. So, continued regulatory, not directly regulated. This is an interesting one. Federal Trade Commission. And I don't want to say stumbled into this, because that would be wrong. Clearly they've wanted to get into this space, because outside of those two industries, most other industries don't have hard security and privacy requirements. So the FTC got in this game a couple years ago when they were claiming that, and they successfully did this, that improper statements of security that end up in a breach can be actionable as an unfair or deceptive trade practice. An example, like a deceptive practice is FTC versus Life's Good. You've seen this clothing, Life's Good. It's kind of soccer mommy kind of clothing with happy-go-lucky things printed on baseball caps. But I looked it up, and it's a case where they said they had a web store. They claimed that they were doing all sorts of privacy and security stuff. They didn't. They got owned. And FTC went, you know, you've got icons all over your webpage saying how awesome your security is. You didn't have any of that. And we're not regulating your security. We're just saying that could be deceptive. If you say it's safe and you're lying, that may be deceptive. I don't know, big leap there. And so they regulated, they filed suit against them under the Federal Trade Commission Act, and next thing you know, they've got a settlement, because Life's Good went, they're pretty much in their rights. And they continued regulating on that basis until actual unfair practice. Irrespective of what we promised you about security, it may be possible that your weak security in and of itself is an unfair trade practice. And that is FTC versus Wyndham. Wyndham Hotels. Wyndham Hotels had laughably bad security. Like no segregation of personal identifiable information and credit card information. Default passwords on critical systems. You know, the password you're supposed to change, like that one, that you Google when it's like, I've reset this router that I've never seen, you know, because your aunt has it, and you're like, I don't know what the password is. Oh, wait a minute, someone's already put up a list of it. Those kinds of stuff, right? No segregation, breach after breach. And it's like, no, you can't do this. And FTC sues them based on both deceptive and unfair practices. And they win on both. So all of a sudden, FTC has this power where they can say, really bad security. And notice I'm being so definite about this term. The court doesn't define it. The court merely points out laughably bad security and says, the court says we're not setting a standard, but you'll know it when you see it. And the FTC comes around and says, we're not setting a standard either, but we'll know it when we see it. So there is this laughably low standard out of Wyndham, minimum standard. So like stuff, I mean, this was like no firewalls, no VLAN, segregating data, like the 101 stuff that Wyndham wasn't doing, and they got regulated against, they got fined. Other stuff, yes?
Can I just point out that their extensive statement on their SSL security, and you know, if anybody read that who was just a regular consumer, they would think that it was totally safe. So that's for the deceptive prompt.
Okay.
For those who didn't.
What's interesting though for Wyndham is the idea though that you don't have to make any statements at all and still get regulated. That's my takeaway. Because think of it this way: after Life's Good, a lot of shops just said we're not going to talk about how secure our website is, right? I make no promises. I'm not telling you any lies. So you have state laws like breach notification. Every state's got a breach notification law, and the amount of law firm websites I read, they're like, these are incredibly draconian. Like, yes, once you identify a breach, you have to tell people. Oops, guess where your data is? No, really, guess. We don't know. That's why I'll be sending you this letter. Dear John, I'm your data. I'll never see you again. So, breach notification, but generally, these breach notification laws will explicitly, they're not always consumer friendly, because a lot of them have what we call a no private right of action, which is a lawyerly term that says you can't sue over it. The only people who can regulate this would be the state attorney general. So, yes, you get the letter. And the letter says, guess where your data is? Gone. That's it. What do? Well, now you know why you're getting marzipan. That's it. Can I sue them? Nope. Can't do anything. Then we have tort. The problem is that tort makes sense in 100-year-old events, right? We have been running into each other with horses, carts, now cars. The self-driving cars will also run into us. We have precedent on that. Even where you don't have a barred private right of action, you still have other problems. You have to show that there was a duty to actually protect you. Right? I have to say that I had a responsibility to protect your data. Then, I have to show that I did not protect your data in an effective manner. I did not do what was reasonable. Then, I have to show that because of my screw-up, that's why your data got leaked. And then the hard one is damages. Who here had a credit card involved in the Target breach? One. How much were you out?
I wasn't. I was informed that my card may have been taken.
But your damages, the actual, like, I put a brick through your window. You know what your damages are because you call up AA Acme Glass and like, yeah, $250. Like, okay, damages, $250. Your credit card was gone. We had to send you a new one. Your old one may be out there, as is your other stuff. What's your injury? Yeah.
Didn't Target just pay Visa about $24 million?
Yes, but because Visa is indemnifying you, the cardholder. That's mostly though because they may have since Target may have not been PCI compliant. I kind of laugh at that because it's like you are PCI compliant when the QSA says that until you get a breach, and then we retroactively say, well, you must not have been. It's like faith healing, right? Do you believe? Yes. You still have cancer. Oh, you must not have believed.
I think I heard it was only like $15 a person. It was pretty low.
Well, it's still probably, banks are still out something if there's more fraud against it.
Yeah, Visa and the banks are where the fraud will be seen because they're hiding it. You're paying it in fees, but
well,
you can't.
You're
But they
sharing
don't
the
also
risk.
give you $15, it's like a minor portion of the.
That's for the time for you to change your credit card number.
Yeah.
Put your auto pay.
But the risk, the point is like showing real damages is kind of hard because a lot of times this is absorbed by third parties. Showing you damage just by that, the inconvenience of my credit card didn't work for 3 days.
It's worth more than $15 check a year after.
But
Yeah.
showing like how much is that worth? Minor annoyances are generally not recompensable. So what's going to make the biggest changes to our industry? Because we're trying to establish this minimum standard. Now, assuming you are outside of PCI, financial services, healthcare, but you still have sensitive data, and you're trying to convince your boss, I want to spend some money, I want to do some things. you have to say, if you want to buy, you know, I want to spend $100 on a bicycle lock, the bicycle better be worth more than $100. And it's hard to quantify. I'm working on a data, like evaluate the value of data, and I'm realizing I'm coming up with some crazy ideas because I can't figure out what the value of your, like, I can figure out what the impact of losing your Active Directory. Right, your Active Directory is gone, your backups are gone. And anyone who's done administration is like, ooh, that's a bad week. But what's the financial impact of that? What's the financial impact? What did your company lose? You lost productivity, but how much of that was looking at cat pictures and Reddit? How much of that was actually doing your job? And how much of that was actually, you can point to that. And my argument for this is, Target lost a bunch of money in the breach because they had 2 cyber threats that year, right? One was Cartosha, right? The POS malware. The other one was Amazon. Which one is insurable? I'm going, because they're going to say all their losses are due to the hack rather than due to Amazon, because I can't go to my insurer and say, Amazon just beat me to death this year. No one sells anti-competitor insurance, but you can say all my losses were due to the breach. And I'm not saying they did that, but there's a bias towards that. And because sometimes the answer comes to be, it's not an accounting question, it's a legal question. What's my loss? And accountant cranks through some numbers and says, this is what we estimate your loss according to GAAP. Lawyer says, what do you want the number to be? Right? This is all advocacy. Not saying it's fraudulent, just saying sometimes you come up with, sometimes there are better answers, yeah.
You mentioned the $100 lock for a more than $100 bike. What if you've got a $100 block for a $75 bike? Because then, if that bike is lost without a lock, you're out $150.
Because you can't get to work. Out $150 because
you need a new bike.
I need a new bike.
Like when you say it's work.
Oh, okay. I
Cost of
mean,
policing exceeds the cost of the object.
yeah, I think that's still when you kind of feel it's still an accounting problem, where it's I figure out like all the possible injury this causes if I don't have a bicycle.
And then that's what you apply it against.
Yeah.
Okay.
But usually the algorithm is you don't overspend on some security because you want your security to be roughly commensurate to the risk you have. And if we just assume your bicycle's $100 and a new one's $100, that we're also removing the cost of I needed to get home tonight. I could actually go through the bother of getting another bicycle, like all the rigmarole. Calculating that, you can build a model for it. Our problem is that we're going through multiple hoops of trying to determine that. So it's my argument is we go with the minimum and then go up from there. So what's going to make the biggest changes to our environment? FTC after window. The information security plus breach may actually result in fines. And that way you can go to management and say, if we have laughably bad security, we can actually get fined by the FTC. They may actually decide to go after us if we're big enough or egregious enough. And there are more shops that have bad security and breaches than the FTC can handle. But they may decide to pick you. It's like speeding on 95. A lot of people are going to do it. Someone is going to pay for it. But they are now sort of in this game. How deep they want to get in the game, to be determined. The standard is low but undefined, pretty much not laughable. It's not the question of do we get the Palo Alto or the Cisco firewall? It's is there a firewall? Are you actually using it? Because the amount of shops like, yeah, we have a firewall. It's in the box over there. Like, and this was years ago. I was actually working at a shop, and that was the problem. And I remember yelling at the system and like, so it's going to stop a burglar because they'll trip on the way into the knock. It's like, I'll install it, like, dust on it, man. We actually should put it in. And I finally guilted him into it. It was like, why do I have to guilt you into installing new gear? New gear is fun. That was years ago. Board of Director liability for poor security. And this is two hoops, because boards of directors of corporations are generally fairly insulated for most actions, unless it's self-dealing or gross incompetence. However, some of my friends from law school or in this business, you as an investor buy stock in company X. You say you buy the stock at $50. Something bad happens to the company, it's now trading at $30. The board of directors are responsible for that loss. Now, if they're actually going to have to pay for that loss to recompense you for mischaracterizing the health of that company or doing something wrong, but there are no suits against Home Depot for saying, we bought your stock when it was here, it's now trading here after the breach. We think the board of directors were grossly negligent in ignoring their own internal findings that said we have weak security. I will be curious to see how these go out, but at a previous shop we had a lot, when we mentioned board people on boards of directors, like, we're actually curious about this. Can you research this? And like, if they're willing to pay me to research something, that says they're interested in it. That says you can circumvent regular management and go to the boards of directors and say, if you think you're not getting the expenditures you think you need to protect stuff, if they're afraid of it, you can bring the FTC in as a potential boogeyman for really bad security. But you can also say, hey, you board of directors guys, right? Not CEO, but above them. So these people show up to guide the company, get paid a bit of money, but if they're responsible for it, like, oh, wait a minute, oh, hell's no. I want that good security stuff. That'll be the level of interest, right? Because they're not technologists. They're usually end-career statesmen and stateswomen in business, but they don't want to have to pay out millions of dollars in a lawsuit if they're found liable. So, tort liability isn't here yet. It's threatened. And I keep watching the bulletins for it to see what happens when someone finally gets directly sued for bad security. HIPAA doesn't currently allow it. Many breach notification laws don't allow it, but someone's eventually going to try it and get it. And then all of a sudden we're going to pay attention. So the threat of lawsuit is actually greater. It's like a good horror movie. Good director doesn't show you the monster until 15 minutes before the end. So insurance, instead of spending additional money on information security. Thinking back to that marginal return versus marginal cost model, eventually you realize that you will never have zero risk, right? There are shops that spend an obscene amount of money on information security and still have breaches because there are people involved, or mistakes got made. You always have those exception systems and you've drawn a circle around and said, we don't count those. So eventually you say, the amount of money I have to spend to defend that is higher than potential liability. Not the potential liability, what I can pay someone else to assume that liability. It's cheaper to go to an insurer once you go beyond the bare minimum costs, bare minimum program. So insurance is going to fit in here, where you're going to hedge your big long tail hits. Your most likely stuff you will defend against personally and accept that risk that your own defense is good enough. But insurance is going to get pushed in further and further. And knowing a few people in insurance companies trying to figure out how to do cyber insurance, they don't know how to do it yet. Because figuring out what causes a breach and all those metrics, it's easy to figure out what a new Corvette's going to cost in the hands of an 18-year-old with a drinking problem. It's hard to figure out what the cost of a health insurer who relies on these vendors is going to cost. So some of these insurance companies are going to get in the market early and lose. Some are going to make decent money. I don't know yet how. So it's going to transfer some risk instead of mitigating. You'll say, I'm not mitigating that risk, I'm just transferring. It's yours now, insurance company. Insurers, though, eventually, once a few get burned, they'll get savvier. They'll figure out what controls actually make sense. And they'll say, instead of just saying, give us this list of your controls and policies and we're going to hold you to that, they may actually mandate some. Or they'll benefit some, right? Do you have these controls? Oh, you don't? This is your premium. What if we did have those controls? We'll have that premium. Huh. Cost of these controls is less than half that premium. I'm putting in the controls. So insurers yet aren't requiring it, but give this a round or two of breach, payout, re-up. When the insurance companies do their postmortem, they'll come up with at least some standards you'll have to meet. Now I realize I've been talking about standards like it's a variable, right? You need to have some of them. What are they? Takeaways. There aren't, in the FFIC, there are no mandated standards. HIPAA is like what is reasonable, and you have risk assessment. So the fight between ISO, COBIT, NIST 853, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, which is the pick one from column A, one from column B, CSC. I think any of them at that governance level will be fine. Pick the one that best fits, because it will help to say, this is the policy, or this is our framework, these are policies that roughly match that. We're good enough, maybe enough to defend from the tort and the regulator stuff. Because I'm thinking the later regulatory agencies to the regulator again is SEC has, I think what was that, last year they said they're going to assess financial services firms that are in their regulatory space against the NIST cybersecurity framework rather than FFIC or something more known like ISO or COBIT. I'm like, that's interesting. Huh. So there's actually a push to say adopt the cybersecurity framework, which if you look at it, it's just, pick from what you like, or if you want to be crazy, make your own. Can't imagine what kind of maniac. Actually, I can, because I worked with someone who did, who had feedback into the CAIQ, CAIQ, Common, our Cloud. God, it's going to kill me. I can't remember it off the top of my head. Look it up. But so there's no wrong standard yet. Meeting one, picking one, and saying we follow that should be good enough for now. Look at the common questionnaires. If you've been in the vendor assessment receiving end, you've seen the questionnaires. You may have seen the language over and over again. There's a healthcare one, there's the CAIQ, I believe some of the Blue Cross Blue Shields are coming up with a common set of questions there. You'll see the same question over and over again. And you can tell if the person writing those came out of ISO or came out of a NIST shop. You'll see the language. Or one was, dealt with one was like, are you FedRAMP? Like, okay, you're coming out of the NIST 853 school, fine. But look at the common questionnaires that come up with what are the controls you're expecting, what are the frameworks you're expecting. So that way you're meeting your contractual requirements. And this is all going to kind of form a model where there'll be a commonly accepted baseline. This is what is good enough. This is what is expected. Of course, recognize that when you are on the vendor assessment sending side, oftentimes the questionnaires are written by salespeople. Why? Anyone get a vendor assessment written by a salesperson? I have, numerous times. Because they're the people who want to make the sale, right? I'm working for the large company sending the vendor assessment, and it's the sales rep who's like, oh man, because they're not imagining I've got to do this, they're imagining a massive freaking commission at the back end. So they're writing stories about security, and the best one's like, when you're like, did you just Google terms? Like Gartner Magic Quadrant. Like Gartner Magic Quadrant is not a security appliance. Yet. I can imagine that would be a great prank. Like it's a 2U box and just does magic. See, bad stuff comes in. The red packets come in because those are the ones that contain malware, and it pipes out pure green ones. How's it work? Magic. Gartner Magic Quadrant. But recognize that oftentimes the people writing these are sometimes lying if you're still in that space. The ones circling around are state law tort cases and the FTC. They're not yet forcing standards, and essentially these two are going to enforce the bottom. They'll come after you if you've done things very, very wrong. That's when you're going to get tort liability. That's when you're taking the biggest risk of tort liability and the FTC getting interested in you. Generally, the middle stuff is going to be the contractual stuff, where you're getting assessed by someone who's got to report back to a financial regulator or Health and Human Services, so they're going to be concerned as a part of their vendor management practice. And the monster that I hate talking about but love thinking about is safe harbor. I had phone calls after that last case came down, which is, what does this mean? And I hate saying this because it's the entire not consulting thing to say, which is, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to try to sell you a bunch of consulting services because I've got a magic 8-ball, and I can shape that as well as you can. What's this mean? Stuff's going to change. How? I don't know. But that's going to be the other looming thing. The Europeans are going to get involved because in a wonderful cloud world, everyone wants to do business everywhere. And the big shops are solving this the easy way, which is German data centers, right? It's obvious. Like, I'm not going to try to figure it out because safe harbor will come back in a much, much, much weakened form. It will be, yeah, you can get a safe harbor certificate and it will count for very, very little. So that's, if you're dealing with international stuff, that's another set of work you're going to have to do, and it might be the easiest is to punt and just rent some rack space in Germany. And I'm not saying anywhere in Europe, but Germany seems to be the obvious one because there's going to be think of the trade dispute we're going to have with the Germans over Volkswagen, which is, it's going to be a sacrifice the hostages. Like, hey, you do that to you. We will do to Facebook what you do to Volkswagen. So, thinking back to how you pipe this up, those of you who are not in pointy-haired boss land, and said you want resources, you want people, you want buy-in, you want to write new policies that might be harder, you might want to write tougher vendor management standards, you might want to be more honest in your vendor management responses. Uncertainty worries management, because this is still a smoke-filled, cloudy room, right? This is not like I can calculate what's my, think this way. If you have two risks, your management, you have two big risks, cyber and currency fluctuation. You can graph the hell out of currency fluctuation and say, the risk of the money we held in euro or renminbi. These are the brackets. This is the most it's going to lose you. This is the least it's going to lose you. And you can come up with a pretty good, like, I can come within like 10% of what the hit will be. I don't think we can get within an order of magnitude of what the hits are going to be for a breach. Hell, it's sometimes difficult to figure out what our budget is, right? Oh, I wonder this thing. You've got to implement DLP again. So uncertainty will worry them. Being able to go back to the hard costs, the easily identified costs, fines, losing contracts, right? Point two, we will lose this contract if we don't put in this control. Easy sale to make. Actually, harder sale than I thought, because I've done that. We just got this contract from a large bank. What's it going to take to have the security? Contract's going to pay $1 million. Like, well, it's going to be $80,000 for the work to do that. Really? Why is it going to cost that much? Like, you're getting paid $1 million to do the work. You know? If you were a carpenter and said, I want you to build this, but you need to buy this tool, and you get to keep the tool afterwards, that's an easy sale. But here it's hard for some reason. Maybe it's just me selling. But to give them some level of certainty, it's hard for you to quantify things like reputational costs, or for you to do tort costs. It's easy to say, these are the last 10 fines by the FTC for doing something similar to what you're talking about. And the FTC, bless their hearts, puts this all on the web page so you can go find them. Insurance. As soon as insurers get better at building better models, they'll be able to give you the cost for not having control. But right now, as a takeaway for those of you who are trying to convince people upwards of you to buy stuff or do stuff, this is what I point out. So, any questions? Have I scared you yet?
I was just going to ask, when did you start working at Leviathan?
A couple months ago.
Okay.
You in the green.
I only asked because I hadn't heard you change jobs at all.
Thank you. So on the insurance issue, has there been a motion yet to completely deny insurance? I'm going to use the example of I used to own a 150-year-old house that was very hard to get insurance for. Has there been a motion in the cybersecurity industry to do that yet?
I've heard of some. I don't know yet, because generally, I don't find out about it until it hits either the trade rags or it hits litigation, where you buy insurance, have a loss, insurance company goes, no. And then you sue the insurance company and say, what was that, all that touchy-feely stuff? You just sent me back my premium check with, oh, by the way. Generally, the rescission, there's hundreds of years of precedence on rescission. You basically have to show that there's a material inaccuracy or in the statements you made to the insurer for them to do underwriting. Like, I said I had these defenses against this loss, and you didn't have them. It's not usually nickel and dimey stuff. It's got to be substantial. It's not like I said my car was red and it was actually burgundy. That's not material. If I said my car had anti-lock brakes and it didn't, and the accident could have been mitigated by that, then you're allowed rescission. It's the materiality of the incorrect statement to the insurer, for them to figure out the risk that they are bearing by insuring.
I add on to that. Do you see in an analogous question for that? Let's say that you installed version 3.0 of whatever the standard is, but in the meantime, that's not the latest. Now it's 4.0. Do you see that as not going to be enough to get you in trouble because it's
There might be it might get more granular than that, or like that might be a bit more granular than I think a lot of the standards would be. It might be that you had some kind of patch management system and whether or not that was an acceptable risk or not.
Or would it just be contemporaneous standards, like, well, most people hadn't shifted to 4.0 yet, because
Because then you're getting into like two parallel problems. How are we on time? We get into like we get into like parallel problems with a standard versus common usage. Is this inherently negligent? Sorry.
Monster.
Well, thank you so much. Used up our time.